What if you turned on the news and got as many ideas as you do reasons for exasperation? What if you saw people collaborating and cooperating and shifting power in all sorts of ways we're usually told are impossible? Well, that's what the Laura Flanders Show is all about. We set out to bring you reporting not on somebody's pipe dream of how things could be, but on real work that is happening right now and shifting power across this country and the world. We don't receive money from corporations or governments. We're backed by you, our listeners and supporters. So pony up some support today at lauraflanders.org. Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is the Laura Flanders Show, the TV and radio program that seeks to raise radical spirits by interviewing forward-thinking people with real-life models of shifting power from the few to the many in the worlds of arts, entrepreneurship, and governance. The fight for legalization of marijuana's never been easy, and it's still not, as evidenced by the recent collapse of a month-long effort in New Jersey and the battle still raging in New York. A key issue in both is how to ensure that legalizing of cannabis doesn't just make for another privatized corporate monopoly, but instead repairs the harm that's been done by the war on drugs. Legalizing cannabis, repairing the economy. That's this week on the Laura Flanders Show, the place where the people who say it can't be done take a backseat to the people who are doing it. Welcome. Pot, grass, marijuana, cannabis, call it what you will. Its recreational use is already legal in 10 states, with many more soon to follow. Among other things, that means big bucks are at stake. Here in New York, where Governor Cuomo is now pushing the Democratic-controlled legislature to move forward on legislation, the market is estimated at more than $3 billion with a B dollars. New York City alone could realize more than $300 million in taxes, on top of an additional $400 million for the state. But who will benefit from this windfall? Will legislation, legalization, lead to corporate control and profit for a few? Or can we seize the opportunity to create a more equitable economy and even provide reparations to those largely black and brown people who were previously criminalized by the war on drugs? Here to help us avoid getting lost in the weeds are three leading thinkers and doers in the fight for cannabis economic justice. Cassandra Frederique, New York State Director at the Drug Policy Alliance. Raybblin Vargas, a grassroots, no pun intended, organizer on social justice campaigns and board member of the Green Worker Cooperative. And Mary Pryor, no pun, co-founder of Cannaclusive, created to facilitate fair representation of minority cannabis consumers. Welcome all. I think we got all the puns out of the way.
Yes. I'm hoping so.
We can just relax.
Cassandra didn't get a pun. I counted. I was like...
We have to work on one. All right, so the latest news as we are recording this is that African-American legislators at the state level here in New York are threatening to block legalization because they're not getting what they want. Cassandra, what's going on and why? And could they actually block Governor Cuomo's legislation, getting this in the budget? What comes next?
Yeah, I think what you are seeing right now is that it's actually been advocates and communities of color really telling their legislators, this is what we need for this to move forward. That we can't go to a place where we legalize recreational or adult use for marijuana and then get to a place where communities that have been most impacted don't have access to being a part of the business. And we have to get to a place where if everyone's acknowledging that marijuana criminalization was bad for communities, then they need to reinvest in those same communities.
Yeah, and let's not be euphemistic here. I mean, they say that 4 times as many African Americans got arrested and I think incarcerated or at least prosecuted for marijuana use, even though use is almost the same in every
I think the biggest thing about talking about this particular issue is that oftentimes people make light, they make puns, but what has happened, it has had real consequences on communities of color in particular. So Black and Latino New Yorkers were getting arrested more than everyone else, even though data consistently shows that white people are using and possessing at the same rates. And it's not just people getting arrested, it's people getting kicked out of their homes, people being deported, people losing custody of their kids, people not being able to pass background checks for jobs, people being on the state central registry until 10 years after their last kid turns 28. So like these are the consequences that have happened. And so rightly so, communities of color are demanding that the government can't come to the table and say, we have decided that we did this wrong and now we're just going to move forward. You actually have to address all the things that happened to us. And this money that is forward should be a part of that equation.
Are there any historic sort of precedents for a situation like this? I'm thinking post-prohibition, legalize alcohol, and suddenly you have rapacious white drug, liquor stores exploiting low-income communities. I don't know. Do we have any models?
Well, I mean, honestly, there's models that haven't really been formed within the current cannabis situation within the United States.
California, Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, well, Colorado, there's no community reinvestment part of any tax or like legislative breakout of anything that's happened in terms of cannabis. The only type of item that you've seen come across in different states and different cities and counties has been expungement. New York is not an expungement state, it's a vacate state. So expungement means removing the record off from your entire, there's a record that you
clearing your record.
Vacation means you're getting it sealed. So that record will still appeal if you do a background check and it'll show up, but it'll be a sealed record. You won't be able to see what the exact charge is. That's what New York allows itself to be able to do.
Which could work for you or against you if people have no idea what the record is.
Well, to be honest with you, against you, we already judge the formerly incarcerated and anybody who has a record on their item anyway in terms of a job, right? So there's that as an issue. Secondly, there's not really a real understanding as to, we're talking about models that have worked. Community reinvestment, equity day one, full restorative justice, a full expungement plan that involves incubators and jobs and pathways into the industry. That hasn't rolled out in any state. When you talk about Colorado, people are like, oh, there's so much money. There's $1 billion that's been generated in tax revenue. None of that has gone to communities affected by the war on drugs. California doesn't have that provision as well. Massachusetts doesn't have that. Michigan doesn't have that. There's no equity program that started day one with this. And as far as restorative justice and expungement, that's all fine. But what's the release plan for those that are currently in prison? Will they be able to get out? Will they be able to have access to job training? Will that job training lead to pathways in the industry? None of that has been segmented in any type, way, shape, or form within the United States.
Where do co-ops come into this?
Well, if you really want to bring the social economic equity into this bill, you have to think about worker co-ops. Worker co-ops is probably the only way in which directly impacted communities of color, of which I live in Washington Heights, one of the highest one of the communities with the highest incarceration rates for marijuana. And I think about all the people in my neighborhood, all the young people that I know and adults that I know that have been impacted by this unfair war on drugs. And if they wanted to enter into the market, because of these past arrests, they're not going to qualify for loans from any bank. They're not going to have the background or the education and training to start their own business. And the barriers to entry to enter into this market is so heavy and so hard that worker co-ops is a solution because it allows people to pool the resources together, create their own bylaws, and be able to govern for themselves. And they can choose to hire formerly incarcerated people because it's up to the workers on who gets to work and manage and own and operate that business.
So the bad news is there's no great model out there. The good news is New York gets to be a great model.
That's right. New York gets to get this right because New York was one of the first states to realize that we shouldn't criminalize marijuana in the first place. In 1977, we decriminalized marijuana ahead of all the other states, a lot of the other states in the country. And so the ideal thing for us would be three things for us. And we are all a part of a statewide coalition called Start Smart New York, which is really addressing all the collateral consequences. So not just focusing solely on sealing records, but also dealing with the child welfare, the immigration, the housing, the employment issues that are at stake. So that includes sealing, vacating, whatever the record is, and then also dealing with all the other collateral consequences. 2, we need to earmark the money that comes out of that is generated here for communities most impacted. There's a very clear map of which communities should have access to those funds because there's a clear map of which communities were criminalized for this substance. And those communities should have access and the decision-making power to what they want their communities to have based on this funding. And then 3, this conversation around equity is how do we make sure that this market that we create is not overrun by out-of-state, heavily capitalized people coming into place? How do we position small business owners and farmers in New York to also be a part of
Well,
this
how
conversation?
do we? I mean, we just did a story on this show about urban agriculture, and you've already got local farms doing local production, many of them co-ops, up against huge industrial local farms.
Well, one of the greatest features of cooperatives is that it could be in every part of the supply chain. It could be processing, distribution, marketing. And what's more important about worker co-ops is that the money is made by New Yorkers and it stays in New York. So more taxes are generated by New Yorkers. It stays in New York State, so it gets reinvested. So the money stays in the community, and so we're able to continue to reinvest back into our businesses.
Because co-op owners, a group of owners, don't tend to flip the business to somebody outside.
And they don't put the money in offshore funds.
Mary?
And just to be even more direct about this, New York has to get this right.
That's right.
There are several major states really just waiting to see what we do. Pennsylvania, Florida, a lot of the amendments that are happening in Michigan right now. Michigan just made its LARA BARD, which is the licensing and entire provisioning of just creating what those regulations look like. There are a lot of states that have just elected to even go recreational that don't even have the frameworks in place yet. New York is a conversation in a lot of different state houses across this nation. So when we're talking about New York getting this right and why it's important, this will be the domino that sets off the trigger for anyone else to adopt any type of policy shaping the creation of adult use and making it a fair and equitable space for everybody to have a chance. So that's why this is a very important matter, and all eyes are essentially on us right now.
One thing we haven't mentioned is that we're talking state change, and we'll talk more about it, but there's also the federal backdrop. And you've got Senator Cory Booker has a Marijuana Justice Act that he's put forward. He's running for president. A lot of other potential presidential candidates and people that are running in the primary have signed on to Booker's plan. What's the role of federal here? And is there any likelihood that we could see any movement?
Well,
yeah, Mary.
From a federal level, when it comes to banking and finance, there's already been conversations in the House and bills being created to talk about removing the provision of 280E, which is on a Schedule I drug. There's a 40 to 70% tax on profit from what you receive within a cannabis and plant-touching business. So, for example, there are people that have to make payments of like $1 million to even $15 million all cash to the IRS. You cannot put it in a bank. You cannot put it in any type of item.
Oh, I'll just reach into my old pocket here.
You can just go into your sock,
yeah,
you know.
Of course.
So that's a big hindrance for a lot of folks in this business, especially if you do have a co-op or especially if you are a small business. And big businesses, you know, they have to make that pay, and it even shutters a lot of plants.
So that could be changed at the federal level. It's banking legislation that's federal.
Potential for this year, yes. However, New York, again, is a key state, and a lot of what happens, and if you even think about it, a lot of the top people that are noticed, AOC, Schumer, Gillibrand, they're New Yorkers. These are people that are mentioned in our news funnel almost every day from a federal level. So a lot of these key, Hakeem Jeffries, a lot of these people are in D.C. So New York is a state that's being weighed so much because it brings in so much capital and so much money into the entire nation in general. So what happens here upon federal, maybe 2020, maybe 2021, but people are starting to use this as a way to run and promote federal decriminalization and to make it federally legal right now.
And I think when we think about the Marijuana Justice Act, it is so much of it is shaping the conversation and the debate of what cannabis regulation needs to look like. And so when we see Senator Booker really having conversations about, you know, people can talk about legalizing it, but we can't legalize it without expunging it. We can't legalize it without restorative justice or reinvestment. And he's really taking the tenets that are very clearly anchored in New York and bringing it to a federal level and forcing the debate to address that.
Well, let's talk about that, because what I'm really hearing from you is saying, wait, we want to do legislation that's a whole lot more than legislation. That in fact, this is an opportunity to model a kind of planning, a kind of commitment to reparations, I want to say, but reparative economics.
That's right.
that we haven't seen in years.
Yeah.
Right.
I think this conversation around cannabis regulation calls to question a lot of societal economic issues, right? And a lot of what we have invested in around criminalization. This conversation around cannabis, if we are moving to a place where we're removing something away as a tool of criminalization, the conversation is, what do we put in its place? Not just by we are no longer criminalizing these people, but this activity that was made illicit was also an economic engine and an economic underpinning for communities that have been shut out of traditional markets, right? And so if we're taking that away as well, that's a destabilizing force. So this question that is being called is a larger societal issue. And so it's less about a big role for government and more about, like, how do we actually want to create sustainable economies that are not built on the capture and criminalization of communities of color.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. My guests are Kassandra Frederique, New York State Director of the Drug Policy Alliance, Raybblin Vargas, who's social justice campaign organizer for the Green Worker Cooperative, and Mary Pryor, co-founder of the advocacy group Cannaclusive. According to recent polls, 65% of New Yorkers support the legalization of cannabis. The issue's been debated for years. Now Democrats control both houses of state government, and yet, April 1st, New Yorkers woke up to find that cannabis legalization was still not in the 2019 budget. At issue is the degree to which legalization will be part of a restorative approach, so that those who've been most affected by the war on drugs and criminalization can benefit the most. In this conversation, recorded just before the budget came out, we're digging into what might be possible. In a moment, Mary Pryor will break down the stats on who owns the cannabis industry now, from big businesses to everyday citizens. Want to stay up to date with how this story pans out? Never miss an episode? Take a moment to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter at lauraflanders.org and follow us on social media. We have a brand new website. Go check it out. While you're there, subscribe to our podcast to receive specials like this and my commentaries, The F Word. The most recent's all about what the media is missing when it focuses on the Mueller report, namely all the government corporate collusion that's sitting in plain sight. Here's Us and Them by Easy Star All Stars, and remixed by Dreadzone from their tribute album to Pink Floyd titled Dubside of the Moon, released on Easy Star. It's not too much if you read Angela Davis, if you read Michelle Alexander. There's a continuity through post-Reconstruction to this very moment of mass incarceration.
That's exactly right.
Continuation of a sort of incarceration state. Could this be a continuation of a kind of reconstruction that we might get right, do better? Is that going too far, Mary?
I'll say this. Here are a couple of stats to think about. Less than 6% of businesses are owned by Black and people of color individuals who are in the plant-touching business and in cannabis. The amount of women that own businesses in cannabis has dropped from being in 33% in 2015 to now 25% around this year.
And women of color?
Just women.
So we don't even know the numbers on women of color.
Well, first of all, when you talk about single digits, less than 6% of all businesses are owned by Black and people of color. So that includes women as well. Women in general, Black women, receive less than 0.02% of established funding and capital within startups.
Just saying.
Cannabis removed. So it's not like there's a level playing field already at all. There's no level playing field here. Big cannabis runs essentially the industry in the United States. Small businesses, everyday citizens, do not have a real chance of being able to enter this industry unless they're aware of the capital items that hinder everyone, essentially. So this isn't, again, just a matter of, yes, this needs to be reparative, this needs to be restorative, this needs to focus on investment, this needs to focus on decriminalizing the plant. But as far as business, this affects the economy for people to be able to even generate and pull into and give into a tax.
But again, it is requiring us to do some planning around the economy.
That's
right.
We've had decades of saying we don't plan the economy, that's socialist.
Well, it's the thing. One of the interesting things, one of the best things that we can hope for to come out of this is that if we even get a portion of what we get in passing legalizing cannabis, it sets a model for all types of other businesses to also have the same type of principles, to include more people of color, to include more women, to have more access to finance and capital in the economy. So we're not just fighting for cannabis legalization and social equity. We're basically fighting for an equitable field so that everybody gets to eat from the food that they raise.
Yeah, and I think the conversation it's a big one, right? It's like, how do we want to create an economy? And the thing is, it's really important to say that legalizing cannabis is not going to cure the ills of capitalism.
Right.
Legalizing cannabis is not going to end racism.
Right.
This is one way to reduce the harms of structures that are harming communities, right? But we can't put on huge ideas on this substance and think that it will save all societal ills. But it means that we have the more space to be innovative, to do different things.
So how do we shift this picture? And I know, Mary, everyone at the table is involved in this. As you said, we came into this story knowing that the context in which this conversation has been happening has been mostly about jokes about people getting high. Mm-hmm. You're saying this conversation is actually about how do we structure our economy.
It's an interesting space for a Drug Policy Alliance to be in, because we're coming to this issue as a criminal justice issue, a social justice issue. But in our work, we are now creating space for an industry. And so how do we make sure that whatever space we've created does not continue to exploit the communities that we're fighting on behalf
Well, I'm all in favor of talking about the economy. I'm just asking, how do we shift the imaging or the story around this discussion? As powerful as our show is, I'm not sure that we'll do it in this half time.
Well, that starts with us, right? So, I'm a patient. I have Crohn's disease. When I go to Crohn's meetings, and when I used to go to Crohn's meetings with Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, I was one of 50, 60, 30, 20 people that represented anybody that was considered black or a person of color, right? So the rooms I was in was pretty much filled with people that were considered either white or Jewish or, ethnic European. To say that, what we think about what plant use is racist, stigmatized, and stereotyped off jump. That's due to the fact that we have the drug war, which started with Nixon, where mostly it was a way to criminalize black and brown folks, as a way to, create an imbalance in the fact that civil rights allowed for people to actually have a potential chance in this economy. So they created the drug war, putting drugs into communities. There's that. And then in 1937, just making the plant illegal. That was a material science and racism issue again, due to the influx of Mexican immigrants coming into the country and the racialized propaganda created around reefer madness, where people would say that black and brown bodies were going to rape white women. So I just say all that to say we can't ignore that. All of this in terms of why things are prohibited are due to very, very stigmatized, ill, not factual identities or any ideas of what people are actually doing with the plant. It was a medicine. It was used in all types of pharmacy items back in the 1800s, 1700s, and 1900s. So there's that existence. What we've lost and what we're just even trying to do at Cannaclusive is just show that everyday people that look like me, that look like you, consume this plant. This isn't an item that should be scoped in fear or wrapped in stereotype. And because we've allowed that to happen for almost 100 years, it's an unlearning that everybody has to do. And what it can't be, though, is this whitewashed presentation of nobody that is of color using the plant, where it's just mostly white women that get to drink tea and laugh about it with their kids and go to soccer practice.
Well, we know that didn't work around affirmative action. It didn't work to try to tell people that affirmative action was not about black people.
Yeah.
It did not work, so this won't work either.
But also I think I think that when you ask about the narrative is already shifting, right?
Right.
You are already seeing people that, like the how you started the segment, which is like Black elected officials are saying, we will block this if this doesn't benefit our community. That is the conversation.
Right.
The conversation is being shifted to this conversation where everyone is like, we can't spend decades criminalizing communities, then learn how to profit off this particular behavior, and then leave that community out. Everyone is having that conversation. They're having it at the federal legislation stage, which is why you see the Marijuana Justice Act being framed that way, having Senator Cory Booker talking about that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is talking about it. Everyone, the framing of the conversation is shifting. You have Governor Cuomo who's saying, we have to do this in a way that does not enrich corporations and actually empowers poor communities.
So to go back to where we began, about what this looks like if we get it right, in terms of opportunity, what people can do or would be able to do, do you want to address that, Raybblin?
The role of co-ops in this cannabis bill is still being discussed because it's new to the legislator. I mean, there are a lot of people who are now in office. We're doing a lot of teaching and education about how worker co-ops actually function, because the bill originally just talked about farmer cooperatives, and they did not understand that there was a whole other, an array of co-ops that you can participate in. There's multi-stakeholder, there's producer co-ops, consumer co-ops, etc. Like the largest consumer co-op, people most known is the Park Slope Food Co-op. Like everybody understands that, and so what we could be is like we can have, let's say in New York City, we could have producer. We go to a farm and we get it produced by a farm co-op that we now process it in New York and then sell it at a storefront in New York City. And all of those are worker owners. And all those profits gets distributed amongst them. They get to decide, like, what are we going to do with the profits? They pay their taxes. Then one of the also important things about co-ops is that we have a Principle 7 that we have to also give back directly back into the community. We have to use our profits to continue. So we can continue in doing education programs, or we can do music programs or whatever, or coding schools, so the ideal world is that in the cannabis legalization, everybody is working in some sort of cooperative, in my dream, contributing, making money, and bringing wealth back into the community. And I just want to also just touch on the fact that the dialogue is not just happening amongst the legislature. There's tons of community forums happening all throughout New York State. And people should really look them up and go to those meetings to really find out what's going on and talk directly to the people who are involved in this campaign.
So Mary and Kassandra, if we have a story, if we get this right, what's the story that we tell the future about what happened in this moment? What do you tell someone 50 years from now we did?
50 years from now, if we got this right, I think we say we did not shy away from the role that race played in where we were starting from, that we actually centered people that were most harmed by criminalization. So people that have been arrested for marijuana, people that have lost their kids, people that have been deported. And we built the legislation and the conversation around those things and educated the legislators to buy in to what was important so that people could remember that it was people that we were fighting for as opposed to profits.
Mm-hmm. I would say that we can say that we were the first to actually formulate a pathway, right? That hasn't happened elsewhere, globally or nationwide, right? The pathway is the biggest thing that people need across the board to be able to even tap into the wealth that is in cannabis. And it's big. It's very, very big.
And I'd like to add that this was done by people-based evidence, by actual communications, not reports and studies that are mostly are biased against us and are usually extract information to be used and manipulated in their own particular way. So that it was really people-centric. It was community-centered, coming from our experts, the community. So like that's something that's I think is unique, that the people are informing this.
You have to hear that, future? You're in good hands. What can people do right now to make this a reality?
One of the ways that folks can plug in is by following organizations that are doing this work. So, for example, Drug Policy Alliance has been working across the country, really trying to figure out how do we push ballot initiatives or push legislation. But in New York, if people want to get involved, we're all a part of a coalition called Start Smart New York. And folks can go to that website at smart-ny.org and sign up as an individual. You'll get updates. If you are connected to an organization, you can also be a part of our coalition build. But immediately, people can join us in Albany. We're doing weekly visits to elected officials, call your assembly members and your senators and tell them you want marijuana justice now.
All right. Thank you all. It's great talking with you. We will continue this conversation and make that future that you mentioned real. That was Cassandra Frederique, New York State Director of the Drug Policy Alliance, along with Raybblin Vargas of the Green Worker Cooperative and Mary Pryor of Cannaclusive. You can find more information on all of our guests, along with things to read and ideas to prod, at our Patreon site. That's Patreon, like patronage. Get it? patreon.com/The LF Show. You don't have to subscribe, but we'd love it if you would. By doing it, you help us bring this radical, solution-based, independent media to everyone ad-free. The show airs over the Pacifica Radio Network and is available through PRX. Is your community station airing the Laura Flanders Show yet? If not, contact them or drop us an email and we'll do it. That's podcast@lauraflanders.org. We're on a mission to double the number of stations carrying the show this year, and we will only be able to do it with your help. So join us. Thanks. This show is produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, with Monica Mohapatra, Charlotte Carpenter, Nat Needham, Natasha Gaspar, Jeannie Hopper, Joanna Pinto, and Dominic Marcella. The Laura Flanders Show is made possible from the Novo, Ford, Tomcat, Cloud Mountain, and Fonda Foundations, as well as by listeners like you. So thank you. Stay kind, stay curious. Until the next time, I'm Laura.